So there's only a couple of ways to get going in business. One is, do you start a business on your own? Do you buy a business? We're going to discuss in this episode what you need to look for if you're looking to do either one, to make sure that you're not in a situation where you're in over your head and you can't pay your bills. And if you're lucky enough to sell it for a profit when you're done.
I'm Dennis.
And I'm Greg,
And this is the More Profit, Less Stress podcast.
where we provide the tools for more profit and less stress in your business now so you can turn into a valuable asset later.
I think there's a lot of, whether it's a good economy, a bad economy, whatever goes on, there's always this interest in starting something or buying something that's outside of the job. Like the desire for more control over my life is somehow mystically going to be found if I start my own business, if I do my own thing. But the debate usually comes down to is, do I go start something? And a lot of times if you see people starting businesses, my opinion, it's usually in the trades industry or a service-based industry where someone's a really good plumber, really good electrician, really good framer, or they failed at everything else. They decide to get into some aspect of construction. And then they got some clients, they got some momentum, they got some traction. And before they really know what's going on, it's kind of grown past their capacity to handle it.
Yeah. And then they're, to your point, they may love what they do, right? They're, like you said, a great electrician, great plumber, great whatever, love what they do, good at what they do. Customers say, hey, you're great at that. And then their customers, their friends, their family go, you should go start a business or buy a business, right? And they're like, oh my gosh, what a great idea. And then they go achieve all that stuff you just said.
Or I'm making $35 an hour as a plumber, but my boss is charging $160.
And I can make all that.
I should be making all of the $160.
Plus the tips.
Right. That I'm going to get through doing it.
Yeah. So then they go do that, and then they discover expenses and cost of goods and
Hiring people sucks.
right.
Trying to find people.
Yeah, and then it's a whole different game. It's running a business. It's owning a business, and it's a different skill set than that thing they're good at.
Well, and that's what makes it dangerous. I think it was can't remember who I was listening to that stated it, but the worst person to own a plumbing business is the plumber. The worst person to own a service-based business is the guy that's great at the service. Because at the end of the day, when stuff gets tough, and it's going to, you default back to the activity you know the best, which is, I'm going to go do more plumbing to make up the deficit in the bills.
Yeah.
Not how do I structure this company to then bring in more revenue to go pay for the bills. And so instead of doing the management they need to do, they're going and running around instead doing the work they shouldn't be doing, that other people should be doing, because they're just in the habit of doing it.
Absolutely. And then kind of going back to, I think we both find this a lot. They go to start or buy the business and they got to come up with the money, right? So where am I getting the money?
Oh, that's the bank.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They'll just give me a big startup loan for a couple $1 million because I told them I wanted it.
Yeah. And the funny part about this, I don't think people think about, just like, okay, so in your life, have you ever had anybody actually, and we're going to divert for a sec, but I'll bring the subject back. Have you had anybody come to you, like friends or family, and say, hey, Dennis, I got this thing going on, this issue, this whatever. Can I borrow a couple $1,000? You ever had that happen? You're like, people want to borrow money. So what's the first thought that goes through your mind when they say, hey, I want to borrow this money?
Am I getting it back?
Yeah, right. So back to your point a minute ago, the bank's like, okay, that's great. I understand you're a great electrician and you're passionate about it. But am I going to get my money back?
Right.
The bank's saying that, right? So banks who are traditional lenders, like they want to see a budget. They want to see a track record. They want to see...
Oh, and a big, by the way, if I don't trust you, can you make sure that I give you your house, your car,
Right.
your kid's inheritance?
Yeah.
What else you want to put on the line? Because I don't think you can do it because you haven't come to me with a plan. Whereas if you have the plan, you have the good credit, you have everything else, the access to unsecured money is a lot higher. That doesn't mean the risk is less.
And then they're, to your point, security. So now they're risking house. They're risking, 401k in the U.S. or RSP in Canada.
Yeah, but you don't understand high risk, high reward, Greg. Right. So if I put it all on the line, I'm going to make millions because I'm willing to take that chance.
Yeah, exactly. So then what I've been finding, I know you've been finding this too because we've been talking about it, but if they can't get the money so first of all, they try and get the money from the bank. Bank says, show me your plan. If the plan's not so great, if the plan's just, hey, I'm really good at this and I've helped people before and they're They said I'm really good at it. They're happy with my service. I should keep doing this to other people. So there's my business plan. Bank has no trust, to your point. So then they got to put a plan together. If the plan sucks, bank says no. The bank would have lent at a decent interest rate. And potentially if they succeeded, then the bank would have got paid. Bank's happy with that. But bank says no. So now where do they go?
High risk lenders.
Exactly.
And that's, I think, the other challenge is if you are doing this whole thing with a plan anyway, and you think all you need is money to get started, you're actually putting yourself in a situation where you're going to spend the rest of your business unplanned, paying back the banks and trying not to die.
Yeah.
And by die, I mean you're trying to have your business not die, because if suddenly it fails, the people you owe money to is a lot bigger than it was when you had a job for somebody else. So the risks are actually monumental. What you looked it up not that long ago. What was the average? So the average business runs however many years it runs, but when it eventually goes to sell, how many actually sell for a profit? It was like less than
the stat we confirmed like less than 2 weeks ago was 75% fail within 15 years. And fail was defined by close or go bankrupt. And then basically after that 15 years, another, and that stat's a little more gray, but give or take somewhere between 80 and 90% fail in total, right? So 75% within 15 years, and then another, say 10 or 15% within life of that after.
So
And
after you've given up the majority of your productive time.
Yeah. And only 4.5% sell for actually a decent value. But here's the scary part of that. And the best way to say that is this. Let's pretend you had a house for sale, right? And you go to sell your house and you find that you cannot find a buyer who will pay you for that house. Like they won't pay you cash, meaning go get a mortgage or pay you cash. They'll only buy the house. The only buyers that come to you will only buy if you'll finance them, if you'll sell. What's that tell you about your house?
Well, that means nobody wants it.
Like you're overpriced. It's not worth it. Nobody wants it. It's a bad house. But that's what's happening with businesses. Only 4.5% sell for a reasonable value.
So,
But only 2.7 of those 4.5 actually get paid cash.
right. So the bank's
So
looking at
half
the
of them-
business and going,
Yeah.
well, there's no way in anything we're giving you any money for this.
Yeah.
So if you want anybody to buy it, you better convince the seller to finance it themselves.
Exactly.
Because it's not worth the risk to us coming in and helping you buy this thing.
Which means the business is garbage. Back
Yeah.
to the example of the house. Now, garbage meaning it's not making a profit after a fair market wage. You know, and when we say that, you and I both say this, but for a business to be profitable or performing, they need to make a profit after paying themselves a fair market wage for the jobs they're doing in their business.
Well, you see that on Shark Tank or Dragon's Den. Like if anybody has seen those shows, it's always funny to watch when they ask the question. They say, "What was your profit last year?" And they go, "Well, it was ABC." Then they ask the question, "Well, was that before or after you paid yourself?" And if they say before, you watch the body language of all the investors completely change.
Right.
Because they go, "Well, obviously this business isn't making any money." Because if the owner can't afford to take a paycheck, and when we say take a paycheck, by the way, it's not, well, I make $2,000 a month, so I'm good. It's, well, if you fired yourself tomorrow, would your next manager come in and pay and work for that entire company at $2,000 a month?
Right.
So you have to be able to pay yourself the fair market salary. So you take a look at either buying a business or starting a business. If you don't have the acumen going in, you have a 98% chance of losing everything
Yeah.
or walking away from a train crash.
Yeah.
So you survived it, but you didn't have a whole lot left over to get yourself through into retirement.
But Dennis, you don't understand. My business is worth more than that because I've spent so much time building it.
Right. Of course it did. And your mom really loves the fact that you brought
Right.
this to the marketplace, and she completely
Yeah.
believes in you.
And I missed hockey games, and I missed this, and I missed that, and my kids' baseball games, and it's crazy. It's actually an epidemic right now in the world. There's no question.
Well, it goes back to education, right? Like, how many people? Like my dad was classic for this. I learned through the School of Hard Knocks. The School of Hard Knocks is a fantastic teacher, but eventually, even the best boxer's jaw gives out, and you can't take any more hits.
Right.
And so now you're forced to learn from the people who are around you to get business advice. And you see this all the time. You see people going to, well, I started the business. I don't know what to do anymore. I'm completely flabbergasted, so I'll go talk to my accountant. Well, their accountant their job isn't your business. Their job is the taxes that you're accountable for when you're running the business. So their entire profit and loss is set up for a tax conversation, not for an operations conversation.
Yeah.
Which makes it really hard to have a conversation with that professional because they don't really know what they're doing. Yeah. So then I might go to my lawyer. Well, my lawyer is just trying to make sure that I'm in legal compliance and not going to end up in jail over anything. Yeah. They're not really, again, looking at the operations of the company. Well, so then I'll go to business school. I will go I'll get my Bachelor of Arts degree. By the way, half your degree is spent on stuff that has nothing to do with the business to get to the couple classes that do. Then I'll go get my master's. So I've now spent, 60, 80, 100,000 education. But all of that education is set up to teach you how to be a manager at a bigger company.
Yeah.
So if you're looking to get into it, you got to ask yourself, where am I getting my education from to go play the game in the beginning, to actually even move forward with this adventure so I don't lose everything down the road?
Yeah, it's, I mean, if it's true that, well, it is true that close to 90% of businesses fail. If that's the report card of, hey, what you just said, I'm going to ask my accountant, I'm going to ask my business lawyer, I'm going to go to school for business. Because the business degrees, I don't know the statistics, it'd be interesting to search, but what percentage of students go get a business degree?
Right.
I mean, it's probably pretty big for a cross-section of all students getting degrees, which should tell us that, hey, a lot of businesses should be succeeding.
Right.
80+% are failing, which says, to your point, even the education system in business isn't working. And you can't argue it because the report card's there, they're failing.
In the words of Moneyball, if he's a good hitter, how come he ain't hitting good?
Right.
So if the education's working, how come the education isn't working?
Yeah. So true. That movie's spot on. I was going to say, you have a good example when you talk about this, when you talk about the game Monopoly, right?
Yeah. So I've often said it this way. You get a chance to play Monopoly. You sit down at the table. The only catch to this game is nobody's going to teach you the rules. And you have to use your own real money.
Yeah.
How many games of Monopoly do you think you're going to play before you have no money left to keep playing?
Yeah.
So, in other words, can you learn enough in the first round that you learn through the school of hard knocks to figure out what the expert players are doing? And by the way, when you get to be an expert player at Monopoly, you're not playing the game, you're playing the players playing the game.
Yeah.
So while you're busy trying to figure out how to play the game, everybody else is busy playing you while you're playing the game. And the ones that actually know how to play the game aren't going to take the time away from the board to say, hey, by the way, Greg, you're being an idiot. You need to do it this way, not that way. Yeah. And the reason why they're not stepping out is, well, business is an incredibly combative sport. Why would I go into an MMA ring and say, hey, just so you know, Greg, I got a bad left shoulder. So when I'm going to throw that left hook, I'm going to have this twitch that's going to come on my face so you can be prepared for it. That way I'm going to make sure we have an even fight here before we go in. No, they're going to kick your ass. Yeah. And then you're going to come back and say, oh, yeah, business was hard, but this other guy's taking all of your money.
And unlike a game of Monopoly, there's no reset button.
Right. I don't get to just go, hey, guys, I'm not going to flip the board. I think and flipping the board in business is kind of like.
And then the issue, back to what we were talking about earlier, is they go to borrow money. So let's say they're in business, like you're saying, they're failing.
But they don't know why they're failing.
They don't know why they're failing. Exactly. Good point. So then they got to go borrow more money. They go back to the traditional lender who lends at a pretty good interest rate. And that traditional lender says, to your point, you're failing at the game. So A, I'm not going to lend you any more money. B, I might need to call my loan because here you are telling me you're failing, and they'll know they're failing because they require financials. C, all that stuff we made you sign up as a security, your house, your 401k, your RSP, whatever it is, your stocks, whatever you secured to me. I want statements from all that stuff. I want to see what it's worth because in the back of my mind, I'm thinking I want to take that. And then the business owner who's failing is desperate goes to their family. So back to the question I asked you, would you lend money? You want to see, do they have a history of results? Can they pay me back? So the lenders are going, well, that's not going to happen. So then they go to these third-party lenders who lend at 25, 30% interest.
Yeah, they might as well be credit cards.
Yeah. So, for anybody listening to this, imagine borrowing a lot of money. Like if you need 50 grand, 100 grand, 400 grand, and just think if you went and took it on your credit card and you pay that high interest, can you make enough money to pay that back? And what we've been seeing, and we talked about this earlier, is before the podcast, is a lot of businesses, like just because you got, they might think the answer is they need to get the money.
Right.
I just need the money, and then, knock on wood or whatever, it's going to work out. Well, it isn't. Like, they haven't changed anything. They keep operating the same way. They just, their answer is, I got more money. And then what are they going to do with the money? They pay off debt they owe. So they're already in debt because they're losing money. So they pay that off and then hope the future's brighter. They don't have a plan. They don't turn it around. The future doesn't get brighter. And now they got to pay all that interest. And the only way, a loan like that never makes sense unless you got some absolute crazy, insane guaranteed thing. Like you sign some new contract and on that contract you're going to make X.
And when we say make
will,
X, we don't mean revenue. We mean talking like
profit.
Profit.
Yeah, great point. That's a really good point. So I know I'm going to make, like, let's say, again, there's a sidebar, but yes, it might make sense to borrow at that crazy high interest if you get a new contract, and on that contract you're going to make $400,000 actual profit, like after the cost of goods, the expenses, everything. And maybe the interest is going to cost you 150 grand. Great. So pay the 150 grand interest to make the 400 grand. Makes sense. But that's so rare. So rare.
Yeah, but you don't understand, Greg. I got to deduct the interest, so it's like free money.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, it's a problem. I know we like we said, we talked about this before. And anybody watching this, just look around your life at how many businesses you've seen, people where they're failing, they get desperate, they try and borrow money. They go to one of these high interest lenders and they borrow it. And yeah, it extends the life a little bit, but that high interest lender wants security, right? And then what happens when you can't pay it? Like,
You better hope you don't own anything, because you won't own anything.
yeah, and anything you own, they're going to take. It's crazy to watch people do that. And it's awesome they have the passion and they want to do it and take the chance. But, and by the way, I think, we're not saying...
Don't start a business.
Yeah.
Be educated before you start the business.
Yeah.
Like, because there's certain things you got to consider when you get into it. Number one, revenue is not like there's an adage that says sales solves all wounds. It's one of the biggest misnomers I think that gets preached, and the guys that preach it know what they mean, but they're not telling you what they really mean. Profitable sales, we're talking gross margin on good sales, can cure a lot of wounds if the gross margin's in the correct calculation. So you got to know what your gross margin is, and for a lot of people listening to this, that's going to be a mystical word. I would just say go Google it. You'll understand what it means a lot cleaner. Because you can have businesses that are doing 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, $10 million in revenue that are still broke. And you think to yourself, well, why would they be broke? They've got so much revenue. Well, because their numbers are so far off.
Yeah.
And then there's, depending on the industry you go into, things change. Like you have a retail background, that there's percentages of dollars you need to dedicate to different things in your expenses, that if you exceed those percentages, you're in a very dangerous position of the whole boat just failing.
Absolutely.
Like, what was the payroll percentage in retail? Like 15%?
On the high side. And every retail industry will be different. Obviously.
Every business is different.
Correct. But a good target range for us was always, if you can hit around 10% wages at the store level.
Right.
So if you've got a bunch of stores and you have a head office is different. But at the store level, give or take 10%, you're probably going to be okay. 15's on the high side, but you can get so to the point of a gross margin, you can get away with 15 if you're a business where your gross margin's a lot higher. So let's just take a store. Like we were in sporting goods, right? We were in branded sporting goods. So we would buy from brands and sell to the customer. Well, those margins would be, if you're doing a really good job, 42, 45%, give or take.
Just to clarify margins, it's the difference between what I bought it for and what I sold it for. Right. So the take between the sale price and the buy price is 45%.
Right.
But the markup on something like that is 90 to 100%.
Right.
Different things. So when we're talking about taking margin hits, After I sell it to the customer and I pay the thing back, how much of that dollar do I get to keep before my expenses?
Yeah.
So when he's saying 45%, he's saying, well, if I only get to keep on a $100 item $45, well, then I'm going to be dedicating no more than $15 of that 45 to cover payroll,
Yeah.
to make sure I have enough left of that 30
Yeah.
to pay for everything else, like my rent and
yeah, exactly.
power bills and
Exactly. So you look at, I guess this is actually a good conversation for those who want to kind of understand some numbers on this, but like in a traditional retail store, like say sporting goods or fashion or whatever widget they're selling, probably on the low end, you might see 40% for like independent kind of stores. On the high end, they'd be lucky if they're hitting 50. Again, if they're buying from a vendor and selling to the customer, which different story would be if they're manufacturing their own.
Right.
Which we can talk
again,
about
different
that in a
businesses,
second.
different
Yeah.
ratios, different everything.
So if they're buying from a company and they're selling to the customer, somewhere between 40 and 45 is probably going to be their margin, probably. Which means, back to the wage question, if you can, if you pay 15% of wages and you want to make 10 or 15% profit, say you want to be really aggressive, make 15% profit. So 15 to wages, 15 to profit, that's 30. If your margin's only 40, you got 10% left.
Cover all your overhead.
Yeah, rent. And a good retailer would roughly be around 10% rent. So now you got nothing left for marketing, accounting, bookkeeping, air conditioning, heating, whatever. All those other expenses.
And if you haven't
right?
planned for it, then even though you think you set aside the profit, the government comes in and says, well, I want this chunk, but you probably haven't saved up for that chunk.
Right.
So now you're into the bank to borrow money to go pay
Compound
off that
problem.
chunk
Exactly.
at high interest rates. And then you end up in this snowball effect of kicking the can down the road.
Yeah.
So like whether you're buying a business or starting a business, the things to think about, number one is, do you even know the game you're getting into before you start to play? And I think most people have no idea the game they're going to play before they get into it. They just think, well, as we talked about before, I'm a good plumber, I'm a good whatever. I'm just going to go start the thing because if I'm good here, I got to be good at that thing. It's two completely different animals.
Totally.
So if you're not prepared for and understand how the numbers actually work. So if we're saying things like gross profit, gross margin, net profit, you don't know the differences, educate before you go play.
We should do a podcast on gross margin.
See if we can overwhelm people with the simplification of a complex topic.
But to your point, it's a complex topic, and it's worth giving more education on it for sure, so people can understand it. I don't know, in my opinion anyway, from my experience, I think understanding what your gross margin percent needs to be. And by the way, we call it, or I call it gross margin anyway, because I come from retail, but a lot of people call it gross profit.
Oh, but gross
It's the same
profit,
thing.
net profit. People don't know the differences between those two words anyway.
So it's a good point. Explain
Well,
that.
I had a conversation with, I was at a networking event and I was talking with a roofer who did $1 million that year in sales. I said, so how'd you guys do? He said, we did great. We did over $1 million in sales. And I said, that's awesome. What'd you guys net? And he goes, well, 30%.
We did over $1 million in sales.
Yeah. No, but I actually asked him, what did you net? And he goes, 30%. And I went,
No.
well, you couldn't have net, in my mind, I went,
Bullshit.
you couldn't have net 30% because the average, guys, you can look this up, average profit on a company is maybe 5.
Yeah, maybe.
So if he's doing 30, he's doing phenomenally better than everybody else. So I went, okay, well, how did you get to 30%? He said, oh, it's easy. I just take whatever I have in labor costs and whatever I have in material costs, and I mark it up 30%. So I'm like,
two problems on that.
2 problems already. So I said to him, I said, okay, so what you're telling me is you marked it up 30%. And again, this is going to confuse listeners a little bit. You might have listened a few times, but
We will do a podcast
Yeah.
on this subject.
you marked it up 30%, which is really closer to a 24% margin. So a markup is what I add, but a margin is the difference between what I get to keep. So on $1 million, you cleared maybe $250,000. That gives you $16,000 to $20,000 a month on average to cover all of your overhead.
Yeah.
Well, his rent was $5,000 or $6,000. He was pulling in $8,000 from himself, and his business partner was pulling in $8,000. I'm like, you guys didn't make any money,
You're losing money.
right? And so he
Couldn't pay yourself
looked
the
at
$8,000.
me,
Yeah.
and he turned around and he walked away. He didn't know what to do with the conversation.
Yeah.
But this is a guy who had been in business in roofing already for 15 years.
Anyway, you can speak for yourself here, but I know we're on the same page with this passion. That conversation is exactly why we do what we do, because that's way too common. Like it's an epidemic. back to the point of 80 or 90% fail. That's a
Just
perfect
they don't understand the
example and
math.
story of why. And, are they willing to make the tough decision? Well, first of all, are they willing to even understand, are they failing? Like somebody like that, maybe he's putting, I'm going to take a guess based on what you just said and say he might have been putting 60, 75 grand a year in his pocket between wage and
I didn't
loss
see
of
the rest of his
profit, because he's probably losing money profit wise. So he probably couldn't even pay himself a fair market wage. So, he thinks, hey, I'm making 60 grand a year and $1 million. Next year will be better. Knock on, it'll be
I'll
better.
go sell more.
Yeah,
we need a really good spring.
Exactly.
Yeah, we got to increase the revenue by 25%,
Yeah.
which is hard to do.
Yeah.
But we're just going to do that tomorrow. I don't know what his whole story is. All I know is it doesn't seem to matter what level of revenue most companies get to. Their profitability is so tight that they're always trying to figure out how it is that they're not going to eat, or they're going to eat more than just macaroni and cheese and provide for the family.
Right.
But yet the problem I run into in the business world is people look at the icons in business, like the guys who are like the Jeff Bezos from the Amazons, the Steve Jobs from the Apples. You take a look at a lot of these figures who've made a lot of money, and people go, well, I can go do the same thing in business, not realizing that those guys are the 1% of the 1%.
Yeah.
It's like when you start hockey, you start in Little League, and you got to be the best of the Little League to make it up anywhere that's substantial. And then you get to the juniors, and now you got to be the best of those guys to even get a shot to get scouted. And then once you get scouted, you got to be the best of those guys to get a placement in the NHL. And now you're in the NHL that doesn't even mean people care about your card.
Yeah.
Because you're still not at the top of the level. So you have in hockey, the 1%ers, the 1%ers. That's what these guys are in business.
Yeah.
Not everybody's going to get there. In fact, if everybody got there, they wouldn't be the 1%ers of the 1%ers.
And I think in summary from today, because I know we got to wrap it up, is for the viewers, and we're going to do a podcast on this, gross margin percent might be the single most important thing you need to really understand to succeed.
When you
right?
correct that, life-changing.
Yeah, totally. Second thing is, if you're in trouble, as Dennis said earlier, like go learn. Go get the education to know how to get out of trouble, because the answer isn't just, I got to borrow more money.
No.
And once you get that plan to get out of trouble and make yourself profitable, then when you go to get the money, like, unless do not go to one of those third-party lenders, it's going to be like 25, 30% interest, because unless you have a solid plan.
If you're that desperate, close the doors.
Right. It would cost you less money.
Cost you less money.
Yeah, because otherwise you're going to go borrow that money. You're going to borrow it unsecured, whatever. You're going to be like secured, liable, and you won't be able to pay that back. You just doubled your problem. So don't go borrow with that high interest unless you've got a solid plan where you've built the numbers, you built the budget out, you made a bunch of changes, and you know they're going to come true. And sorry for the graphic here, but you know they're going to come true to the point where someone's got a gun to your head, and if you're wrong, they're going to pull the trigger.
Well, because they are.
Right.
They're going to take everything from you if you're wrong.
Yeah. So that's our advice today.
So whether you're starting up or whether you're buying, you need to know the game you're playing before you start.
Yeah.
The risks are too high if you don't.
Yeah.
Although there's a lot of reasons people start businesses or they buy businesses, but almost all of it has to come down to they're looking for a lifestyle change, they're looking for more money. These are great pathways, by the way, to get a better lifestyle and to make more money, if you know how to play the game.
Yeah.
I can't put on skates tomorrow, grab a bunch of hockey gear, and say, I'm going to go make it $30 million a year as an NHL player. I'm in my 40s, dude. I don't have it in me to even skate down the ice, let alone at the level of these kids. So you have
wait, I got to skate backwards?
Right, shoot, and circles. I got to turn. Right. There's too much about it I don't know. Yeah. But business is the same way. Like, you have to know the game you're going to play. The only differences between hockey and business is when you know the game of business, you can start it at any age. But you got to know the game before you start.
Yeah. Thanks for listening to the More Profit, Less Stress podcast. If you liked what you heard, be sure to subscribe or follow on your favorite podcast platform and leave a comment or review if you're feeling generous. To learn more about us and what we do, check out our website. Until next time, take care.